Our world has never had a shortage of natural disasters, wars, and other calamities. But lately, crises seem to be unfolding at a breathtaking pace. Where is God in all of these events? For some answers, let's welcome Reverend Phil Blackwell, Senior Pastor at First United Methodist Church, Chicago Temple. We also welcome Matt Lippman from First United Methodist Church and Darius Harrison from Gorman United Methodist Church. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here today. Reverend Blackwell, first off, how do you explain to your parishioners what's going on in the world with natural disasters and political calamities and kind of general tension in the world? How do you explain that on your Sunday sermon?
Well, I think there's a difference between the political activities and the natural disasters. And for a long time, centuries and centuries, religious people attributed to God the reasons for all manner of things. You think about Noah and the flood, or the parting of the Red Sea, which is a political activity of sorts. And I think in those days, as people tried to explain to themselves what was going on, that was the best explanation they could make. Truthfully, today, when I look at, let's say, the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, I don't see any way to attribute any of that to God, other than that is part of the working out of the natural powers in the world. One way for the earth to keep its constant temperature is for those plates to shift, which causes earthquakes. So it's not as if somehow God says, okay, I'm now going to rain this terror upon Japan. It happens because that's the way the earth is sort of moderating itself. When you look at the Middle East and Northern Africa and look at those activities, again, that's not really God, I would think, at work on one side or another, though I do think there is a inborn desire that I would consider God's gift to us toward freedom, toward wanting the kind of expression that many of the people in the Middle East now are fighting for. So to some degree I say, okay, that's a human desire, and that desire, I would say, is attributed to the Creator. But then I wouldn't say, well, God's in this bombing or that bomb or this freedom movement.
So how do you generally address the idea of human suffering in the face of God's existence? How could God let humans, his offspring from a Christian perspective, suffer in the way that we do?
Well, it's sort of like asking a parent, how do you account for the suffering of your son or your daughter? You don't bring it upon the child, but there are ways in which you raise a child to live in within the parameters of the world, and you know that some things are going to happen to your children that are beyond your control, or at least beyond the kind of control you would have to exert in order for something not bad to happen to your child. So freedom, free will, as it's sometimes called, is a gift from God. But along with freedom, there are then certain consequences that are really beyond control.
Matt, Darius, how is your generation making sense of what's going on in the world, both politically with the uprisings in the Middle East and also kind of in terms of the sequence, seemingly unfolding sequence of natural disasters from Katrina forward to today with what's going on in Japan?
Well, I personally think that it's a way that we can become stronger as a country and as a world as a whole. With these disasters, it brings us together to help whatever happened, put all of our attention towards that one area. And that's how I think that it helps us out.
Well, when we talk about it in my school, we always talk about how it's like everyone just coming together as one and for one common goal, like we've done plenty of times in our country. So it's more not about the disaster, but about what the people are doing in the end.
Recently, after the earthquake in New Zealand, a pastor was quoted there as saying that the disaster was not a work of God. The earthquake in New Zealand was not a work of God. That the way the community came together and bonded and cared for each other was a work of God, and the love that they shared to each other. Is that similar to the message that you are giving to your community, Reverend Blackwell?
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's a way in which we're trying to figure out, as our two gentlemen are saying, how do we bond together to do these things that can help get the water where they belong and the blankets and the kind of help that we can give. So it's not, at least in our congregation. We're not trying to figure out, so what did these people do wrong to deserve this thing? Because then you got to figure out, well, what did the people who got snowed in during the Great Blizzard on Lakeshore Drive, what did they do wrong in order to get snowed in? Well, that's going to take a long time to get to a bad answer. So that's not where the issue is, but it is how do we get help to people best we can.
Darius, Matt, have any questions come up for you personally or in your friend group about how these things affect us, how they affect you, that you'd like to ask Reverend Blackwell? Have you had any questions about your own faith and seeing other people suffering from this side of the world and kind of being separated and how you can connect with them?
Well, I have a question that involves many Christians. I wanted to know, do you think that Christians look for something to blame, so they look for God as a source of he did this and he caused this?
I think, yeah, I think God gets a bad rap a lot when people are looking for some reason beyond maybe their own responsibilities. And so if they can't blame somebody else, they can blame it on God and see if that works. But there is some piece of human responsibility, not necessarily in the disaster, but when you build a nuclear reactor on an earthquake fault line, you've got to take into consideration that that might not be a good thing.
There might be some consequences to that.
Yeah, when you build, much more locally around the Chicago area, when you build housing developments on wetlands, you shouldn't have to blame God when your basement floods. You know, there are certain things that we ought not to be so arrogant about in terms of our own abilities to cope with second and third generation disasters, that we think whatever we do is going to be okay. Because I do think we are making some impact on our own ecosystem that we do have some responsibility for, and we are paying some price for it. I wouldn't blame that on God, but I'd blame it on our own arrogance.
How do you see faith, and specifically Christianity, moving forward from its beginnings in kind of biblical depictions where God did send, you know, in stories from the Old Testament, wrath upon armies and people for reasons, various reasons, to now saying, well, you know, this is our book and this is where, you know, our faith originated from, but we don't really believe that as literally as people once did. How do you kind of incorporate both perspectives?
I think that 21st century religious people, including Christians, need to be good scientists. And this is where, again, we can have some help from the computer experts and the pre-med folks and all. Many of the explanations that are in the Bible were the best science of the day back, you know, 6,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, when the world was flat and it had four corners, and the Earth was center of any universe once a universe was discovered. Well, we have over the centuries decided, well, no, the Earth is actually not flat, and we've discovered we're not at the center of the universe. And those discoveries did not discredit faith, it just shifted the ways in which definitions are made. So I think that faith has to incorporate the best reasonable and scientific information we have, and not to see it as a threat, but as an enrichment, maybe even an amazement of how we might understand God to be at work and so the complexities of the systems that people are discovering.
Well, thank you, Reverend Blackwell, Matt, Darius, for being here today. I'm Bo River. For Different Drummers, keep the faith.